Welcome everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to read our disclosures and then get started. So with that said, this is recording disclosure. Please note that we are recording this workshop. If you would rather be incognito, please turn off your camera and change your name or remove your name. We are not recording content from the breakout sessions. Conference comfort agreements. We ask participants to please honor the conference comfort agreement found on page 6 of your conference program. Peer support to peer support specialist. If at any time you need peer support, please visit our website at www.peerapocalypse.com for a list of the on-call peer support specialist or the David Romprey, Oregon warm line. Questions and comments. We ask participants to keep themselves on mute. If you have questions or comments for the presenter, please use the Q&A or the chat box, and we will do the best we can to answer your questions. Thank you, and now I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Brandy.
All right.
Great. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So, Aaron, do you want to pull up the slides and start talking?
So just a technical detail. We're both kind of new to this. Well, everybody is this technical thing, so we might have a few glitches along the way, but we'll do our best.
We will get through this together. And I already see someone has asked if the slides will be available later. Yes, they will. We will definitely do that.
There you go.
Wonderful. Okay. And I'm unmuted, so we're ready to go. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, the title of our workshop is Supporting Healing for Veterans Who Have Experienced Military Sexual Trauma. We do want to be really clear that Aaron and I, we're peer specialists, and we come at this from a peer perspective, and also we're veterans. So we're coming at that from that perspective. We're not here to talk about treatment techniques or therapy techniques. That's not what this is about. Today's workshop is really intended to give folks, especially people who aren't familiar with military culture or the topic of military sexual trauma, to give a really basic introduction to those things. And also share some resources so that you can learn more and that you can support others with that. So really just to help you be more educated so you're better prepared to support folks should you encounter someone who needs this kind of support. So that's where we're starting from today. And so we'll start by introducing ourselves. For those who don't know me, my name's Brandy. I am an Army veteran. There's a picture there of me the day I graduated basic training, and that was, I actually did the math today, that was 24 years ago, almost to the day. That was quite a while back. I was 18. So that's me. I'm an Army veteran. I'm also a trauma survivor and an MST survivor. I am a person with lived experience and mental health challenges. And I am currently the director of the Office of Consumer Activities at OHA, which is a fancy way of saying that I represent the voice of the experience at OHA, and I engage with people in communities around the state to make sure that your voices are elevated and really incorporated into work that we are doing to improve our behavioral health system. And Aaron, if you want to introduce yourself. And you're muted.
Thank you. I'm Aaron Barrow. I've been a peer specialist at the VA for the last 8 years. I work in the Veterans Recovery House in Vancouver. It's a 45 to 120 day live-in program. I'm also an Air Force veteran. I really wanted to put a really cool old school picture of myself in the Air Force, but then just spaced looking for one. So instead, I did something a little self-braggy. I won the Peer of the Year award for Portland, which I was pretty excited about. And that's me getting my certificate of appreciation. So that's that.
Great. So I know that Morgan mentioned the comfort agreements earlier, and Aaron and I also wanted to say a few words because we know that this is a topic that can be really hard to talk about for everyone. And I'll just say too, you know, I mentioned earlier that I'm an MST survivor. This is really the first time that I've talked about this in a public setting like this. I've sort of mentioned it before, but never like this. So this is a big step for me too. So just acknowledging that this can be hard for all of us, and that everyone, including our presenters, will or should hopefully feel free to take a break at any time, reach out for support if you need that. Really just take care of yourself. And also, we are asking, and we will not, as presenters, we will not be sharing detailed or graphic stories or experiences. So I want to reassure everyone that we really want this to be a safe and trauma-informed presentation and discussion. And we're asking folks, especially during that Q&A, to please refrain from sharing those details also. We also are asking folks, again, because during the Q&A, people might mention experiences or share parts of their story, and we're asking folks to keep those things confidential, because again, this is such a, or can be such a sensitive topic for folks. Okay, next please. So this is a quick overview of some of what we'll cover today. Erin is going to kick us off by talking about military culture, and particularly the aspects of military culture that create that context for military sexual trauma. And then I will talk a little bit about military sexual trauma and what it is, and the impacts that it can have on folks. And then we will share some ideas about how to support folks who've had this experience, and some information about resources that are available for people who've had this experience. Oh, Erin, there you go. You're muted again.
Technical details. Who needs to hear me anyway? So if you've been in the military, some of this stuff might sound really familiar. Some of it might not. Course results might vary. Experiences vary from person to person. I'm just going to try and give you the biggest, most general overview of military culture that I can. And a lot of this is a lot of the negative stuff. There's a lot of positive stuff too, but kind of what we're highlighting is some of the more negative stuff that sort of perpetuates MST and why it makes it such a difficult topic. So I'm going to be talking about who joins, what kind of military culture is like, and how this kind of creates some risk for MST within the military. A lot of risk, if I'm going to be honest about that. So why do people join? There's tons of different reasons why people join. Some people do it out of a sense of duty or patriotism. There's a lot of military families where they're trying to follow in their family footsteps. I had two brothers that were Marines, and they both wanted to learn how to fight. So they got into the Marine Corps. There's not a lot of rite of passages in this world we live in, and so some people want to see it as sort of a rite of passage or a way to grow up. Or you could be like me, where you have a troubled home life, things are really challenging, and I was working for $4.25 an hour, you know, bussing dishes, and I went to talk to a recruiter, and they're like, hey, we'll give you tons of money, free medical support, all your housing will be covered, all you have to do is sign on the line. So I'm also a very patriotic person, and I have a lot of family in the military, so it can come from a lot of different directions. Sometimes people will get a nudge from the judge, or it might be just a combination of factors. So who's in the military? What makes up service members? So traditionally, there are very few women in the military, very few. Only 2% of enlisted and 8% of military officers back in 1973 were female service members. That number has spiked dramatically. Now it's 16% enlisted and 18% of officers. That's still kind of a much smaller number. That's still very much the minority of the military, but we're seeing a lot more female veterans coming into the VA now because there's more female service members in general. As far as how old people are, this is like a really big number to me. So the percentage of people who are 20 or younger, that's 83% of the Marine Corps. Of course, these numbers are a few years old. 65% of the Air Force, 65% of the Army, and 65% of the Navy are under 20. That's almost everybody. And that's something that really struck me when I was in, is I was getting trained by people who seemed like they're a million years old, but they're only like 25, you know? The sergeants that were in charge were people in their mid-20s, you know? In charge of people in their early 20s who were in charge of people who are still teenagers and trying to navigate the world and life and, yeah, all the big stuff that's happening. So in general, people who are in the military are very young. It's few and far between we have members who are over 30 years old. When you're in it, you don't really notice as much as after you get out. As far as whose socioeconomic backgrounds, people tend to be pretty evenly dispersed between the rich and the poor. And I was kind of surprised to find this. I thought a lot more people would be in the lower, low income to low middle category, but it turns out that financially speaking, people are kind of all over the map. Same with where they're from in general. 25% from the Midwest, 40% from the West and Northeast, and then 35% from the South. So a bit more of the West and Northeast, but again, pretty even spread. This number is really weird. So this is minority representation in the military. I'm sorry, it is an antiquated term. I'm taking that right from the federal databases. As you can see, in just about every branch, people who are considered minorities are much more overrepresented in the military as they are in the general population. Something I want to say, though, that's really strange, and I don't quite understand it myself, is that people with Hispanic lineage are not considered minorities as far as government statistics go. They're considered another race, which is not race, another nationality versus a racial category that would make them a minority. I know that the bulk of everybody I worked with, or a lot of people that I worked with, had Hispanic lineage. And to see that represented in the numbers of people who are considered to be in the minority groups is kind of a travesty. I think these numbers that you're looking at now are highly skewed because of that odd classification that the federal government makes. So when you're in the military, you are considered a piece of military equipment. Your personal identity is stripped away. In basic, you get your head shaved, you wear the same clothes that everybody else wears. People call you by your rank versus your name. A lot of that's to dehumanize you and build you up in the military's image. Being a piece of military hardware comes with a lot of caveats, like you can't call in sick unless you see a doctor, very strict about how your hair must look, how your clothes must look. Just about most of your life is kind of controlled in a major way. Where you go, where you don't go, who you can see, who you can talk to, who you can't talk to is under pretty strict control while you're in. One thing that always struck me is there's no quitting without going to prison. It's like if I'm working in a bad job now, I at least have the option to look for a better job, or even a lower paying job where I have better living circumstances. But when you're in, you're in. You can't quit. If you quit, you go to prison. So there's no, where you got to either run to another country and hide for the rest of life, you have to go to prison, but there's no getting out of a bad job or a bad situation without breaking the law. You're completely reliant too on your chain of command and the people that you're working with. And again, a lot of times this is just other young people who have slightly more experience or rank than you for all your food, your medicine, and your basic freedoms. Freedom to come and go and freedom to be who you are. That's really important. Sorry, Brandy, do you want to jump in?
Oh, no. Sorry, I was just thinking about that example we were talking about earlier about the sunburn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So while my dad was in the Air Force, he was in during Vietnam, but he didn't want to go to Vietnam, so he joined the Air Force and he ended up getting stationed in England. One weekend, he passed out on the beach and he got a bad sunburn, and he ended up getting a federal reprimand because he damaged a piece of government property. So, if you really think about that.
Yeah, and that was still happening when I was in the 90s, and that's what they would tell us. Put on your sunscreen. You're not allowed to damage government property. That was something we heard a lot.
Yeah, it strips away your basic humanity, and it also really your world gets really tightly constrained to what's right around you at the time. The military is very complex too. Every branch of the military has different acronyms they use, different piles of bureaucracy, different paperwork, different designations. I have a hard time talking shop with someone from the Army because they have a whole different set of codes that they use around what they do. Same with the Navy, the same with the Army. There are things that we have in common, but there's a lot of stuff that's just Greek to me when we're talking with people from other branches. It's good to know too that each branch has its own rituals, its core responsibilities. One example of that is that people in the Air Force say hoorah. That's the way we say it. Whereas people in the Marines say hooyah. And what do they say in the Army, Brandy?
Hua.
Hooah. Yeah, that's just a little thing, but you can tell which branch someone is from by how they say that. So there's a big party culture in the military. I hung out with people from the Army, people from the Navy, and of course I was in the Air Force, and drinking is very much allowed and encouraged and kind of pushed. This is a picture of a beer vending machine. I don't know if it's the beer vending machine, but when I was over at the Army barracks hanging out with them, they actually had this in the barracks. So where you live, they had a beer vending machine. You could go down there at 4 in the morning and put your dollar in and come out with a Budweiser. It's just what you do. Hazing is very common practice. During the 90s, there was a concerted push to pull back a lot of the hazing rituals because they were getting a lot of bad press, people getting feces smeared on them and beaten with pipes and all sorts of fun stuff was making it into the news. And so the military has been pushing it back against the hazing culture, but it's still there. And it's a very common practice.
Well, and something I was going to say about that too is for women, and thinking about when I was in, and this was 1995, 96, I guess it was 96, and women, they had just really begun incorporating men and women together in the basic training platoons. And so as women, we were targeted for a lot of hazing, especially from the drill sergeants. And it was this weird thing. It was sort of presented to us, and I believed it at the time. It was presented to us as like, we're treating you, it was almost like an equality thing. Like, we're going to treat you like one of the men. You want to be here, you want to be a man, quote. You know, you want to be like a man, we're going to treat you like a man. And if you were a woman who could sort of take that, it was a point of pride. And now I see that as completely warped, right? But at the time, I totally bought into it. And so I can remember, you know, there's different aspects of the training, but when we went through and learned how to throw hand grenades, and there's this whole process, because obviously these are actual hand grenades, you got to be really careful. So there's this whole process of like holding them to you, holding up close to your vest and walking down the wall and getting ready. And and you're not supposed to give your grenade to anyone. You don't move, you don't, you know, all this. So the drill sergeants were going up and down the line to try to, they're sort of hassling us, saying, give me your grenade, drop your grenade, you know, trying to make us do something so they could punish us. And they targeted me and another woman really specifically, and they were grabbing us by our, we had these flak vests on, and they grabbed us by the vest and they were throwing us up against the wall saying, drop your grenade, drop your grenade. And we thought that was great because we were being treated, it's like we were tough and we could take that, and it made us tough and cool and made us fit in. It was a way to fit in. So I kind of went on a lot about that, but it's hard for me to overemphasize how much that plays into that and trying to fit into that male-dominated, hyper-masculine culture.
Absolutely. It could be as simple too as taking a new recruit out and getting them so drunk that they get alcohol poisoning and throw up all night, you know? And you better drink, because if you don't, then you're a pussy and you can't cut it. And so you need to go out and drink until you're blackout, puking on yourself drunk, because that's how you show that you're ready for military life. And that's pretty common. I had a friend in the Navy. She was lamenting that people who wanted to get in the Equator Club used to have to crawl through garbage and get beaten by rubber pipes, but the Navy thought that was too tough for some reason. And so they were changing that practice, and she was kind of mad about it because she didn't get to do that to anybody else after she had to go through it. So it's kind of a weird thing. Hypermasculinity is really endorsed and encouraged too, as Brandy was saying. Just having to be like a man's man, and, you know, kind of, it sort of places women in the position of being property versus human beings. That, you know, there's a lot of emphasis placed on getting notches on your belt, so to speak. Women aren't really seen as people, even outside of even other service members, you know, aren't really seen as human beings. They're seen as conquest, you know. And that's really, it can be difficult to really kind of describe in an adequate way what it's like when you're in and you're actually kind of experiencing it. But again, we're talking about people mostly under 20 acting like adults, being supervised by people under 20, it's really kind of this twisted culture. It's like people that don't know better, trying to shape the lives of people that also don't know better and learn from people who also don't know better. A lot of the stuff that I was seeing while I was in, I didn't come to terms with until years and years after I separated from the military. So anything else would you like to add there, Brandy?
Nope.
Okay. So military personnel, you can face a lot of unique stressors. You're separated from your family at home. You're under a constant pressure to conform. There's a lot of value placed on suppression of emotion and denial of trauma, which is important in circumstances. If you're in a combat situation and you're supposed to run out and put your life in harm's way or run into gunfire, you better be able to kind of suppress that fear and you know, kind of live for the Union at that point. So there's a reason that this stuff exists, because sometimes the horrible stuff we ask our troops to do, they wouldn't be able to do unless they can get into this kind of emotionalist place. So there's a warrior mentality too. So you're the person that's supposed to help. You're not supposed to be the person that needs help. You know, asking for help is considered a sign of weakness and can be embarrassing to you. It can be embarrassing to your entire squadron. It can block your potential for rank and promotion and growth within the military too. I had a bad room inspection. I had a messy room. It was awful. But the chief of my squadron was going around and inspecting rooms with the chief of the squadron that shared a dormitory. And he was really embarrassed because I had this super messy room, to the point that he wanted to kick me out of the military for having a bad room inspection. So kind of my punishment was facing a court-martial. And then spending the next 6 months under the microscope, having people like randomly drop into my barracks room just out of the blue. And if I had a piece of trash on the floor, I would get kicked out of the military, which was extremely, to have to go through that for 6 months straight is extremely stressful. But that's kind of like the repercussions for embarrassing your unit can be pretty intense. All right. Anything else you'd like to add before we move on, Brandy?
Well, I was just thinking as you were talking about being under the microscope, and you know, when you mentioned earlier about that constant pressure to conform, the worst thing you can do is stand out. You know, you do not, you know, and actually we used to throw around in the Army, we used to throw around the word individual as an insult, like stop being a freaking individual. That was,
right?
You know, and you don't want to stand out. And then when you talk about, when you talk about people who maybe don't fit the mold, don't fit the military mold because you're a woman, because maybe you're an individual, a BIPOC identifying individual, right? Or you're someone who is maybe LGBTQ, right? Any of those things where you're seen as different and you're seen as the other, it's even harder to try to fit into that culture, and you have to work so hard. And I can speak, you know, again, from my experience as a woman in the military, and how I just didn't want to stand out. And I always did, because I was often the only woman in the room. And that's really, and that also will depend on the job that you do or the MOS that you have, right? So I was a radio operator. And so I was, that particular job, it was really heavy, male dominated, male heavy. And so I was usually the only woman, and that you can't help but stand out, so.
Yeah, in our squadron of 300, we had 2 female people that worked, you know. I was in civil engineering, electricians, plumbers, and the like, and I worked with one of the 2 females in our entire squadron. Yeah, even in basic, I don't know. Basic, you have this megalomaniac that's paid to scream at you for 12 hours a day, and the people that stick out get a lot more screaming than the people that don't stick out, or beaten, or having to do push-ups, and you know, it's pretty intense. So, all right, Brandy.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is a little bit about military sexual trauma and what it is, and sort of how it relates to some of the things that Aaron shared about military culture. Next, please. So military sexual trauma is broadly defined as sexual assault or sexual harassment that occurs during a person's military service. And so that can look a lot of different ways. That's anything from verbal harassment, sexual harassment, unwanted sexual advances, to coercion, so coerced sexual activity, unwanted touching, and assault and rape. And next, please. And we know that military sexual trauma is something that can and does happen to anyone. It can and does happen to men and women. This information here about the prevalence of military sexual trauma was gathered by the VA. And so this was when the veterans healthcare system talked to people who were seeking services in their system. And they just very simply asked the question, have you experienced military sexual trauma? And they found that 1 in 4 women that they talked to said that they had had that experience, and 1 in 100 men they talked to said they'd had that experience. And there's general agreement that that is vastly underreporting, that this is a very low estimate of what's actually happening for a few reasons. One being just the stigma around sexuality and sexual assault and people's reluctance to talk about it. We also, that also relies on the person being asked the question, feeling comfortable and safe disclosing it. It really depends on who's asking the question. In my case, it was a primary care provider who I saw once a year. I didn't really know her that well. Had it been a man, that would have been even more difficult for me at the time. And also, this was people who are actually seeking healthcare services at the VA, which leaves out a large number of veterans because there's a lot that has to fall into place before you're even eligible to seek care at the VA. And so, for a lot of people, and I know this was true for myself, a lot of people who have experienced MST aren't comfortable going to VA healthcare settings. I considered it a last resort for a long time, not because of the quality of the care, which in my case was always very good when I did go, but because I felt unsafe and uncomfortable in the Veterans Hospital and in that environment. So that's, and what did I leave out? Oh, and so like I said, people of all backgrounds have experienced military sexual trauma, regardless of their physical size, their age, race or ethnicity, or sexual orientation. And I did want to add too, as I was doing some research for this presentation, one thing that I encountered was some information about how LGBTQ people have experienced military sexual trauma, and particularly when we think about that era of don't ask, don't tell. And I think it's still difficult, even though technically people are allowed to serve openly. At the time of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was this added layer, for much of our military history, there was this added layer around if someone had been assaulted, and if it was a same-sex assault, that there was even more stigma and shame around being able to report that and talk about it. And it was also, there was something that used to be called lesbian baiting. And the idea behind that, and that's not my term, but the idea behind that was when women weren't allowed to serve openly, they would be pressured, and this happened to me, I remember this. You're pressured to go along with the harassment, you're pressured for sexual activity, and if you say no, then you're accused of being lesbian, and at the time that could really threaten your career. So there are just other layers of trauma and discrimination that play into that.
Not just your career, but you could end up in prison,
Yeah.
if you're,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, outed as someone, yeah.
Yeah, and dishonorable discharge, and loss of benefits, and there's a lot that goes along with that. So, next slide, please. And again, I wanted to talk about some of the ways that military culture plays into the issue of military sexual trauma, and why people, well, sort of why it happens, or how it can happen, and why people don't talk about it or are afraid to talk about it. Again, there's that pressure to conform, and I talked earlier about not wanting to stand out, and so that pressure on women, BIPOC identifying individuals, LGBTQ plus folks, the additional pressures that come with that. There's also the hierarchy and the command structure. And Aaron touched on this a little earlier when he talked about the fact that, well, first of all, there is a very strict hierarchy. You know, you do what you're told, you're completely controlled. And if you don't do exactly what you're told at all times, there are serious consequences. And you're also very dependent on that command structure, like Aaron said, for, you know, your food, your housing, your pay, your freedom. And that's particularly difficult if the person who has assaulted you or harassed you is part of your command structure, or friends with your command structure, or just not sympathetic or interested in dealing with the situation that you've reported. You know, for myself, in my experience, and not to go into detail, but after my assault, I attempted suicide as a direct result of the trauma and the reaction to the trauma that I experienced. And the first thing that my commanding officer said to me when he came into the hospital, because I was taken to the hospital, the first words out of his mouth were, "There goes my perfect incident record." So you can imagine how supported I felt and what that was like. And that really illustrates this next point, which talks about the appearance and the reputation of the commanding officer and the military. And Aaron talked about this earlier too. This idea that everything that happens, everything you do reflects on your unit. There's this, you know, there's this focus on loyalty and sticking together and really sort of covering up for each other. And that extends to incidents like sexual trauma. And then the other thing to think about is the fact that, you know, because the military isn't just a job, you know, it's your whole life. So, you know, in my job now, now I'm working from home, so that's a little different. But, you know, like we go to the office, we do our job, and then we go home at the end of the day. Or even now that I'm working from home, right? Like I'm set up in the spare room and I shut the door and go be with my family and leave this in the evenings. Well, when you're in the military, it's your whole life. And so, you know, you continue, in a lot of cases, you continue to live and work closely with that same group of people all the time. And so if the person who's perpetrated this against you or is perpetrating this against you is your coworker or lives down the hall, there's no way to get away from that. You can't escape it. And again, with this, you know, when Aaron talked earlier about the amount of control they have over your life, you go where you're told. You're assigned to a duty station, you're there. It's not like you can sort of apply for a new job or put in for a transfer. You're there and you're stuck. And that can be very difficult. And again, you could very well be reliant on your perpetrator for your basic needs. Next, please. And so just to briefly talk about the impacts that this can have on folks. And it's really, obviously it varies a lot from person to person, but you know, it can impact people, your whole life. So, you know, your work or your school performance. And I want to say too, you know, the impacts can be immediate. They can be, you know, medium term, long term, any of these things could come up at any point during a person's recovery process. And so, you know, it can impact work and school. It can impact your relationships with others, you know, your family or personal relationships. Can lead to sexual concerns or sexual issues, can impact sleep, your mood and your emotions, self-esteem, food and body image, and it can, and certainly in my case, I developed an eating disorder, which I can directly tie back to my experiences in the military. The people who, as a way of coping, sometimes turn to substance use or risky behavior. And then it can also have impacts on your physical health and pain, and not just from physical reaction or physical harm that could be done, you know, when this happens to you, but also just ongoing due to the stress and the trauma and the way that sometimes trauma can manifest in our bodies. Next, please. And then these are this is some information that Aaron was able to find, some of the studies that have been done to look at the psychological impacts of military sexual trauma. And again, I didn't say this earlier, but at the end of this presentation, there's a slide that has all of these resources. So if you want to look more into this and learn more, you can do that. But what we've found out is that people who have experienced MST often experience poor psychological or mental and physical health. There's a greater incidence of substance use and addiction for folks who've had this experience, and just in general, a higher rate of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And Erin will say a little more about this later, but for people who have experienced MST and apply for benefits through the VA, compensation through the VA, it's considered PTSD. That's a category of PTSD. And there's actually, so people experience much higher rates of depression or depression disorder. And then again, like we said, it can express itself in many ways. And Erin and I, as part of our research for this presentation, we talked to one of the MST coordinators at our local VA office. And he shared some information about, when they go back and they look at people's service records and medical records for effects of the trauma and signs that these things have happened, some of the things that they tend to find are people throwing themselves into their work, and so overperforming or overwork. They also can find that, again, that substance use might be a coping mechanism that people use. Some people they'll see expressing a lot of anger, so maybe fighting or, trouble in their relationships and violence. And then some folks who have a history of trauma might have other kinds of exaggerated mental health, I shouldn't say exaggerated, but other mental health symptoms or, trouble with their moods or trouble with their emotions. Next, please. Oh, and then we have a video, which Erin is going to play, which has some folks, this is produced by the VA, and it's some people sort of talking about, again, not in detail, but talking about their experiences and some of the ways that they were able to move through those things. Uh-oh, we don't have sound.
Let me try. Sorry, we had this problem yesterday. I'm not sure. Can you hear it now?
Incident happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
And hazing, and it just turned into more than that.
I just told him that I'd been physically assaulted. At that point in time, I had already started believing that that's all that had happened, was a physical assault. I was scared.
These are things you just go around bragging about, saying, hey, this happened.
Oh, sorry.
So you just tend to keep to yourself. I thought that it was something maybe I did, because I was really new at the unit.
When you're back in the file cabinet every day and when you're broke down every day, you can laugh it off to a certain extent, but it weighs on you.
I lost all trust in people because some of the things I experienced. So even with family members and loved ones. So it was very hard for me to connect with people.
I mean, it was everything from depression to anger to grief, but not having anything to really understand what I was grieving about.
And I found myself staying in my bedroom, all dark, TV screen on, curtains closed. I would interact with my daughter, but I knew something was wrong. As much as I loved her, I wasn't really the same.
Substance abuse is what I used during the majority of my life to mask what was really bugging me.
So years went by, and everything started creeping up on me. It's like I was fighting with myself. If that didn't happen, let it go.
I just stayed at work, nose to the grindstone, earning overtime. I was just stuffing emotions that I didn't even know I had.
It really changed my life. I mean, it started to affect my relationship, and came to a point where it's like, okay, I really need to talk to somebody about this.
I thought about what I really wanted in my life, and I decided that I was going to give the VA a try and try to push through these issues.
I didn't know that some of the sexual harassment I encountered, how much it impacted me until I went and talked to someone.
It was a feeling of relief. It was also a feeling of, this happened to me, but it doesn't define me.
You have so many resources that you'll be able to stand up for yourself It's a difficult and long process, but you're worth giving yourself a chance.
Getting mental health helped me embrace my life. I start being happy again.
Like, it's so good when you take the time for yourself to do the healing for yourself. If you had the courage to go through military training and devote your life to your country and be willing to die for your country, you have the courage to do this.
The day I
Oops.
got
Thanks, Erin.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So I'm just going to say a couple words about sort of peer support and supporting folks who have experienced MST, and then Erin is going to take over and talk about some resources and also about VA benefits that are available to folks if they want them. So, Erin and I both come from that perspective of peer support and peer support specialists. And so, for military sexual trauma, peer support is incredibly valuable. And, we've, in talking to veterans, just in general, because of the unique culture and the way that, the experiences that people have, it's really important to veterans especially to have that peer support and really be talking to other people who understand and have been there and done that. That's hugely important. And because we know peer support is based on that shared lived experience. And I think that, especially if you're not a veteran and you haven't been through that process, that doesn't mean you can't be a great support for a person who's had these experiences. And sadly, I think that a lot of us, in this field, a lot of us in the world of peer support, and a lot of people with lived experience have experienced this kind of trauma, even if it wasn't military sexual trauma. There are a lot of folks who have experienced other kinds of sexual trauma. And so I think that sometimes there is some shared lived experience, and I think that can still be valuable. For myself, being able to talk to another woman who's had some of these experiences, even if it's in the civilian world, has been supportive and helpful to me. So I would say, don't feel shy about offering that support, and know that it is appreciated, even if it's not a perfect match. Just that understanding and support is appreciated. And I would say, and again, falling back on our peer values, letting the person lead that conversation, and thinking about, I'm trained in intentional peer support, and thinking about some of the values that we use with that approach, really approaching the relationship as a partnership where we're learning and growing together. And we have that focus not on what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you, right? This all applies to this situation, and also helping the person, supporting the person to think about how they have learned to make sense of the experiences they've had, what messages they've told themselves, what messages they've heard from others, and finding a way to change that and take a new look at it and really find, create new ways of thinking about their experiences and living their lives, and finding a way for us to move towards what we want. So that was a big shift in my own recovery, being able to move from this place of fear and avoiding, and I don't want this to happen to me again. I don't want to think about this, or I don't want, or wish it didn't happen, or, any of those things, and move to this place of, this is the kind of life I want to live. This is how I want to feel. And this is where I'm headed. And that can be a huge shift for folks, and certainly was for me. Just helping people get unstuck from that place of pain and fear. Another thing, when we're talking about supporting MST survivors, especially if you haven't been in the military yourself, just remembering what you've learned about military culture, and remembering how that can impact people's reactions, people's willingness or ability to even talk about what happened, particularly when we talk about, and Erin will talk about this later, about applying for benefits or having those conversations, seeking services. Thinking about how that military culture might impact people's ability to pursue those things, and just being really understanding and supportive. And you can offer folks resources if desired. There are resources out there. And be aware that people who've had this experience might not feel safe accessing services through the VA. So that's, and then there's, next slide, please. the last thing I wanted to say is, again, because this can be such a tough topic to think about and talk about, just remember that you, as the supporting person, deserve care too. And, you know, when I said earlier that unfortunately a lot of us with lived experience do have some of this kind of trauma in our background. And so be aware of that. If that's true for you, be aware of, think about your own experiences and the impact that might have on your relationships with folks and your ability to support people, and know your own limitations, have your boundaries, care for yourself, and don't be, you know, please take care of yourself and seek support if you need it. And just be aware of what might come up. Thanks. And next slide. And there's your part, Erin. I hand it off to you.
All right. So let's talk about some supports that are in place for people who have been through some of these challenges. The VA kind of, through a lot of congressional action, has really started to offer a lot more support for people who have experienced MST. There's an extremely low barrier care at the VA. So a lot of the times, if someone doesn't have a honorable discharge, or even an other than honorable discharge, or some sort of medical discharge, they won't have access to VA services at all. But there's a super low barrier treatment of the VA. So even if someone doesn't qualify for other sorts of services, they can qualify for services to help with them, experiences with MST. They don't have to have a documented case come from the military. They don't have to have disability status connection to get in and get help. The treatment is offered free of charge, so there's no co-pays involved. And there's other caveats that are in place, like the person who's being served can ask to meet with a male or female doctor if they really feel uncomfortable, say with the male doctor because of some of the trauma they've been through, or vice versa with a female doctor. Every hospital system too has a MST coordinator that can answer a lot of questions and be like a portal to different services. Yeah, there's a bunch of websites that I'm going to post at the very end of this, and they'll be uploaded to the Peer Apocalypse presentation database also. The VA's also established a crisis line for veterans who are going through acute crisis, especially if they're feeling suicidal. And they have a branch of the crisis line that's specifically for vets. If they call the crisis line at 1-800-273-TALK and then press 1 at the end, they'll be routed specifically to someone who's trained and is or a veteran themselves to come and help them through. You can also do a confidential chat over the internet at veteranscrisisline.net, or they can text 838-255 to have a textual conversation. There's a lot of non-VA resources out there also. The RAIN, Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network has a lot of different helpful things that people can get into. Lean In for women, 1 in 6 for men, and the National Violence Resource Center also have a lot of helpful information and resources that people can tap into. The Veterans Benefit Administration has also been a lot more proactive in helping people connect with benefits who have experienced MST. It may have been, long as they were in the military, it could have occurred off duty, could have occurred while they're in training. It didn't have to specifically happen A, in a combat zone, or B, on the job. Every state has their own specially trained MST representatives who have, and there's only like 2 for the entire office, because they've been really deeply trained in how to work with somebody in a culturally responsive manner and to know what to look for in someone's record. We were talking with our local MST coordinator for benefits in the state of Oregon, Kevin. He's a wonderful person. His email's at the end of this slide, but he's talked about how a lot of the times this stuff won't be in the records because, a lot of units will cover it up, or the person will be so traumatized they won't even, they won't be able to report it, or just for a myriad of reasons. So what they do is they look for markers. So say someone's job performance, as we were talking about earlier, just goes through the roof all of a sudden. That could actually be an indicator that something happened and they're throwing themselves into work to try and distance themselves from the event. Or maybe, they went and got medical treatment for, sexually transmitted disease. Maybe there was a pregnancy involved. Maybe there was a police intervention from the outside of the military. So our MST benefit coordinators are trained to look for all of these markers that might be hidden things that aren't readily available looking at someone's military record. Since 2011 too, there's been a push to kind of retry previously denied claims based on evidence connected to markers versus evidence coming from military records specifically. So even someone who's been denied in the past, I would kind of encourage them to try again, specifically by getting a hold of one of the MST coordinators in their state.
And I just wanted to add something else that Kevin told us when he was talking about the process of establishing the case, that this has happened so people can get benefits. He mentioned that when he talks to folks, he doesn't ask them to go through the details of the incident necessarily. It's more about sort of time and place, so he knows where to look in the service record and in the medical record. So I think that speaking as a person who has not sought out this particular benefit because I was afraid of doing that, that was actually something that was reassuring to me to hear and has actually made me reconsider my decisions around that. So that might be something that folks would find helpful to know.
And how important that training is too. Kevin was telling us that sometimes the newer records are all digitized and they can do a quick word search and shoot through them in a hurry and find things, but some of the older records, they have to go to microfiche and pull up thousands of records and read through them one by one. And having that training is super important. Oh. So what people might be able to get connected to if they're get a disability status. So what the VA pays for, they don't pay people specifically say, oh, you've had experiences of MST, here's compensation. What they do is they look for challenges that they've had in their life connected to experiences of MST. And they actually classify it specifically as PTSD caused by MST. So if you say someone's having issues with nightmares, then that could be part of the service connection. If there's physical challenges that they're having now in connection, that could be part of the benefit structure. So what benefits people might be able to get to is a regular non-taxable income that will just pop in their account every month. Enrollment into the VA healthcare system for medical treatment. A hiring preference for federal jobs, 10% preference. It could also include pension, career services, educational assistance, home loan guarantees, insurance options. There's a lot of benefits that are associated with having a service-connected disability. So it could be really helpful for someone who's been struggling. So next we're going to launch into a Q&A section. Real quick, does anybody have any questions about the benefits? Okay, we're going to...
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Well, I had something else I wanted to sort of mention as part of that conversation we had with Kevin, because he talked a lot about benefits and how folks can get access to that. And he also talked about some other sort of, I don't know what the right word is, supports that people, or things people might want to know around, like people who maybe need to change their discharge status, if you remember that part of the conversation. So sometimes if folks experienced MST and then were sort of thrown out of the military for one reason or another. Do you need to say something, or you're just...
Oh, my wife just jumped in, so I was just waving. Oh. Hello.
What do I... Yeah. Hi, Aaron's wife. Yeah, so folks who maybe experienced MST and then were discharged from the military for one reason or another, maybe because of substance use challenges as a result of those experiences, or like in my case, I mentioned that I attempted suicide and I was discharged from the military, luckily, honorably, but not everyone got that honorable discharge, and that can be a real barrier to getting services later. So there are ways to go now. People are understanding that that's something that happened to people. So there are ways to go back and ask to have those discharge statuses reviewed and sometimes changed. And sometimes if it can't be changed, people can still be made eligible to get certain services and supports in spite of the discharge status.
Brandy, I totally have to agree with you. That's kind of been a bone that I've been picking with the VA for a long time, is if someone's having a lot of mental health challenges because of stuff that happened in the military, they're probably going to be doing things that the military doesn't like, and that eventually will get them kicked out. I had a relative myself, my brother ended up kind of getting lost in substances, you know, to try and cover up some of the trauma he was experiencing, got caught in a piss test, ended up with another than honorable discharge, which meant that he had a pretty severe case of PTSD that he never went to the VA for. Maybe he could have gotten services, maybe not, but he was really discouraged because he didn't meet the qualifications for VA assistance. So that can be a really big game changer.
Yeah, so that's something to ask the MST coordinators about if folks are interested in finding out how to address that. And I think another piece that people also have experienced, that I personally experienced, and I think this was actually a big thing back in the 90s, people who had experienced, women particularly, who had experienced MST were then discharged from the military under personality disorder. And so that, we know that that happened a lot, particularly to women. Although for men, I think it was more of a, you'd get the sort of conduct disorder or, you know, and then for women, it was more like the borderline personality disorder. So it did also happen to men. I don't mean to minimize, but there was sort of this rash of military discharges due to personality disorder. That's a thing that, which was actually following incidences of MST. And so there's also a way to go back and have that changed. So that, and that would be something that the MST coordinator could point people to also.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Brandy. I totally forgot about that, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So we're going to go into a question and answer space next. I want to remind everybody about our group agreements, that what people bring up is confidential to the group. Of course, this is being recorded, so just keep that in mind. Please don't share detailed stories. We're just worried that people might get activated while they're in this space, and we want to keep it safe and comfortable for people to kind of learn and gain resources. If you are feeling kind of activated, please take some time for yourself, or find someone who you know you can reach out to for support. And are there any other comfort agreements that people can think of that might be helpful right now? All right, so let's go into it. If you have any questions, this is the time. You can either enter them into the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
So I'm seeing one question. Oh, go ahead. I was going to read the question from the chat, but does someone want to go first? Sorry.
Okay, go
I'll
for it.
wait.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
So someone asked, Richard asked, is it common for the VA to deny MST or PTSD because the person suppressed the experience and didn't pursue? The VA confirmed that it happened through their research. I'm not sure if you want to talk about that, Aaron, or, I mean, I'm thinking about that conversation.
I'm assuming it's a lot more common now. Like I said, the VA benefits coordinator that we talked to, Kevin, did talk about how a lot of people might be pursuing stuff way later in life because it, you know, that experience was pretty intense at the time. They couldn't come to grips with it, or it just kind of, it created some major barriers. So that's something that I think benefit coordinators do understand and are cognizant of.
Yeah, and I think too that it's much more, there's more of an awareness of that now. I think it used to be a lot more common for those denials to happen. And I think that from talking to Kevin, it sounds like there's a lot more awareness now of what this experience is like for people and how people will be reluctant to come forward or reluctant to report, and more of an effort to address it with folks.
I think Brandy, Paul said he might have something to add to that conversation. He's a peer specialist down in White City.
Yeah, please jump in.
The VA.
Hello, yeah. Judging from my own case and other cases that I know of, it's pretty common for them to deny up to a point, and then they start an investigation, and it's up to the veteran to actually gather some information, create buddy statements, and to actually get a full case out of it, it takes a long time and a lot of perseverance. However, while they're doing this, they can walk into BHIP, which is behavioral health, and they can actually be treated on a separate deal, even if they're not service connected, for around 6 months, I believe. So they can have both things going at once, and with the VA system, it's pretty good bet that you're going to get shot down your first time. So if that happens, just keep going. Keep asking questions. If you have buddies that are in there, they can write buddy statements and develop a case.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
Travis or Jimmy, did you have a question for us?
I do. And so I'm a program coordinator at MHAO, but I'm also a peer support specialist here, and I'm the only veteran we have. And my service experience was fairly traumatic. I kind of went into the military after having gone through a lot of physical and sexual abuse earlier in my life, and I was actually caretaking for a Navy commander that had retired after 30 years and broke his neck and was completely paralyzed. And his experience kind of gave me the courage to like approach the military to be able to get what he had, you know? And before I could get through tech school, I mean, I went through a lot of harassment from people in my flight when I was in training. And when I got to Keesler, I ended up in the hospital one morning because I was crying. Long story short, when they finally did have someone sit down to talk with me, they smoked me out and told me, you know, if people knew certain things about your life, you could spend the rest of your tour in Leavenworth, right? And it scared me really, really bad. So I took the exit, and I never really, I was extremely traumatized from that point. From that point, my life just went like totally down the toilet. I mean, there was no one that wanted to help me find a way through life at drug addiction. And 20 years later, somebody encouraged me to connect with the VA, to try to look back at all of that. When I got my DD-214, it was a conduct discharge that I was pregnant, which was extremely difficult to deal with. And oddly enough, when I share that with people, they laugh at me a lot, which just compounds the trauma around it. The question I have is that supporting other veterans, it's very difficult for me to separate myself from my own experience, to encourage or to support. And I'm kind of looking at it as part of my recovery. As I started the adjudication process, but I've been so afraid that I'm just going to get that same reaction over and over again. That nobody really gives a shit about what happened, and I was less than 6 months in, so there's no benefits to be directed towards me, but it's still hugely traumatic. And I try to figure out how to balance that, but I just don't. To be able to support a peer telling them to go through the process, I'm not familiar with the safeties in place through the VA process that gives them the strength to be able to trust the system. Curious as to any feedback on that for myself and for peers that I support.
So, go ahead, Brandon.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, so you experienced a massive amount of trauma in the military, and you found that most people don't understand it, who haven't been through similar circumstances. And also, when you did seek help, you ran into a lot of barriers as a result of that trauma and how you were treated initially. Well, that's a lot to unbox. I'm not really sure. You know, being able to, I have a really minor service disability status for tinnitus, which means I get ringing in my ears. But just to apply for that, and for some knee issues and elbow issues, was really gut-wrenching to put myself out there just for that. And I have to assume that to kind of go through the process is really difficult. I think one thing you did say that's important is that nobody really understands it like someone who's been through it. And so being a peer specialist who's been through it, I think you're in a unique position to support someone who's also going through that process, because you understand what they're going through. You can connect on a human level. When I work with people, I got really burned out for a while because I was jumping into the helper role, but I wasn't acknowledging the secondary trauma I was experiencing, or just the mental health challenges I was facing. I was pushing mine aside to help them. And so a key to my own ability to be a good peer specialist and to be helpful to others is to really hyper focus on making sure I get a lot of group support and mental health support, and continue to grow too as a person. If I don't do that, I'm not very good to the people I work with. So I applaud you for kind of pressing forward through all this difficult stuff that you've been pushing forward through. Lisa, did you have something to say? Or was you just waving?
No, I raised my hand in the participants list, and I thought, well, I'll turn my video on. I don't like the way I look. That's anyway, I have a lot of trust issues with the military. And I was encouraged to do something about this, and it's turning out to be much harder than I thought it would be. I thought, oh, well, you know, what's the worst thing they could say? No, I'm sorry. The worst thing is having to try and deal with the system. That's the worst thing. And I didn't realize even how much trauma I had experienced until I had to start this process of writing it all out and trying to remember everything. I'm 60 now, and I was in from 1979 to 1990. And they've lost my records. I have no proof of this, and yet I have to go through this. It's just, and my trust issues. When I was in the military, a lot of the trauma I got was from the medical people there and the psychiatrist, the psychiatrist that they sent me to. My last appointment with him was, and here I was reaching out for help. And my last appointment was with him was, he said, he stopped me when I was talking, and he said, listen, Lisa, what you need to realize is that everyone in this world, excuse my language, everyone in this world is an asshole, and you're the biggest one. And I went, why would I want to see a psychiatrist in the military? And yet now the VA is reaching out to me and saying, oh, you can come and get help. Like, from you people?
Right.
So I have real serious trust issues.
That's huge.
Yeah, I think you're not alone in that.
But I need help.
I think that's where the role of peer specialist is just so key, because nobody's going to understand those trust issues like you understand those trust issues, you know?
And I want to help others too.
Yeah.
And from talking to Brandy, that's why I'm even here. So.
And the VA does a lot of stuff that doesn't work, honestly, doesn't work. So even if you're in this massive bureaucratic system, you have to be your own best advocate. And that can be really difficult if you're kind of experiencing a lot of secondary or trauma at the same time, to be an advocate for yourself and say, this isn't working. I need to do something different. I need to see a different provider. I need to, that can be a struggle sometimes.
Is there peer support embedded into the VA's process now for people going back to correct these things? Or is it something you just have to seek outside and just trust the military process?
I think it's hit or miss. It's from what Aaron and I could figure out that there isn't anything like that here in this area. So if you're in Oregon or this region and you have to go through the Portland VA, they don't have anything like that. I know some places do. You know, when I was on alternatives a couple of years ago, because it was in DC, and I actually met up with a couple of women who are peer specialists specifically to support people who have experienced MST and helping them through that process. So that it is out there, but not everywhere. And it sounds like not here.
Well, I will say from my experience, to give the VA a big hands up, had it not been for a veterans benefits analyst calling me to like go over my request, and she just happened to catch me at the right time. She stayed on the phone with me for 3 hours that night. I was suicidal. And she wasn't even, you know, the crisis line. She was just somebody that really understood and heard me. And the VA, through humanitarian classification for me, was instrumental in me getting mentally stable and to a place where I could seek treatment. So I'm extremely grateful for that. But sometimes I think I should just leave it there and move on.
Yeah, I think it's really hard, and you touched on something really important, something that's important to me, which is that and I mentioned earlier about not seeking a lot of services to the VA or being afraid or feeling unsafe to do that. And I completely relate to that, what you talked about earlier. And I have also had very good experience with individuals within that system. And so I think that if there's a spark of hope, that's it, is that there are people working with the VA in that system who are doing incredible work and really have that heart for serving veterans, serving usually their fellow veterans, right? And that there are people there who want to help. So, you know, it's a matter of finding those folks. And so I think, you know, we said earlier that, you know, we've talked with one of the MST coordinators there who Aaron and I both were just blown away by the information that he had, but not just the information, but his approach and his compassion. So I would suggest folks, he's a great person to connect with for that support.
Who was that?
It's Kevin, and his information is in the end of the slideshow, and I'm drawing a
Okay,
blank on his
great.
last name, but
No,
we will
that's right.
make
I'll
sure
catch
everybody
that.
has that. And he told
Thank
us,
you.
he said, please give everybody my name and contact information. He wants to hear from folks, so.
Thank you.
I see a question that we had been asked that we missed from Patricia. What is being done with the military to decrease the rates of, where did it go? Decrease the rates of MST in the first place? Are they actively addressing the culture and other issues that perhaps say MST? It seems like there has been some acknowledgement of it as a problem, but I am interested to hear what they are doing to address it.
I don't have an answer for that. I mean, part of it is I've been out of the military for 20 years, so, you know, but I don't know. I don't know if there is anything.
I'm in the same boat. I've seen a few newspaper articles and videos where top-ranking officials in the military are acknowledging that it's a problem. I think that's a good first step. There are things. There was an incident that happened in the dormitory I was living in with a few of the guys I used to hang out with, and they were coming down and telling me, like, this is going on upstairs. And it wasn't until like 7 years later I was in college and I was talking about what happened in a college class, and my instructor's like, hey, that was rape, you know, and it never even, the two wires didn't even connect. And I think until there's a huge change of culture, to start just openly talking about this stuff with service members right out of the gate, you know, it's going to keep happening. It's, you know, unless that ignorance is kind of pushed, you know, broken through by people in positions of authority in the military. I'm not sure, and I don't know if that's happening. Maybe it is. I can't say it's not, you know.
Yeah, my sense is that there's definitely a very long way to go.
Yeah, I agree. there anyone else who has a question or before we close for today?
I'm not seeing anything.
I'm not either.
Yeah. Well, really want to thank you all so much. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your questions and comments. Just really being engaged in this, and thank you for your support. People have been very supportive today, so I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here and bearing witness. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the
Thank
last thing
you.
I'll say, I just want to let everyone know, I put my contact information in the chat earlier. I actually have this next hour blocked off, so if people are wanting support and want to reach out and talk to you up here, I'm around and available. So I will be for about another hour, hour and a half. So, bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put my email back up too. If there are any VA specific questions I can research or answer, please feel free to reach out.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
I see one more question. Are there resources for children who are born from these situations?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot more information on the LEAN website and the RAIN websites that you're probably even going to find at the VA. The two civilian websites I have on the PowerPoint. Oops. And again, I always upload our PowerPoints to the Peer Apocalypse website. You can find the two that I did last year on there. So you'll be able to get all of this from the Peer Apocalypse website also.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.
Thanks, Morgan, for the support.